when I threw my fastball, this is actually how I threw my fastball. And I had never been a high carry guy, but honestly, this cue really works. It increased my carry, and you can really feel it come off your fingers. Like it feels like you're really pulling down on the ball, which is what you need for a four seam and for it to carry.
All right, so today we are going to do something a little bit different on the episode. Me and Josh have both selected one pitcher that we want to give an in-depth breakdown about. It could be a variety of things, whether it's personal things or performance-based. I know for mine personally, I'm going to dive into more of the performance side of things, but we thought this would be cool. These are two pitchers that we both really enjoy watching compete. We've learned from both of them and think it'd be cool to share some insights on both of these players. So, Josh, I'm going to kick it off to you to get us started. Who is your pitcher?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of my favorite pitchers in the big leagues. You know, Yu Darvish, Yamamoto, Shohei Ohtani. But I think the guy that I really wanted to talk about today was Shota Imanaga, just because he had such a great start to the season. You know, he had a pretty bad outing the other day. I think he gave up like 10 earned runs in 3 innings or something like that. But other than that, I think the Cubs got like such a great deal. He signed a 4-year, $53 million contract. And so far, I mean, it's been a total bargain for them. So up until like pretty recently, he had an ERA in the ones, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, I did a little bit of research on him, especially when he first signed. And even today, I just had to look into why he was so good. And so Shota Imanaga is the guy who I'm going to be talking about today.
Perfect. No, I think Shota's a great one to do. I've really liked watching him pitch. Obviously, he's left-handed, so I'm biased more towards left-handed pitchers. Mm-hmm. But I remember when he first signed in the offseason, my buddy is a diehard Cubs fan. So if you're a Cubs fan, follow Brendan Miller on Twitter. He does a podcast on the Cubs, writes about the Cubs daily, like really good insights. But so he asked me when they first signed him, like, what do I think of this guy? So I looked at some video, looked at public data that was available through the World Baseball Classic. And I was like, this guy looks pretty good. Like overall, it looks like he fits the bill. And it does seem like, you know, if he pitches like he has in Japan, like this is a pretty good steal. And he was kind of under the radar just because of Yamamoto and just some other players this offseason. It does really seem like they got a steal. And like you said, he gave up 10 earned in his last outing, but it's one outing. For the most part, he's been really solid this season for them and really has carried that rotation a little bit, especially when Justin Steele, their ace, went down the very first game. And they had a couple other guys, I think, get hurt too. Like he really had to step up and lead that staff, and he's done a phenomenal job. So what is the first thing you're going to jump into about him? Real quick, everyone. I wanted to let you know that my new course, Pitch Design U, is officially available for purchase. I have 3 core modules inside the course. The first one covering the fundamentals of pitch movement, how it is created. Number 2, I break down how to throw every single pitch type with major league examples, as well as Edgertronic video. And then the last module, I dive into the analytics and the performance of every single pitch and how to optimize the usage and your arsenal overall. Check it out in the show notes below. All right, back to the show.
Yeah, so obviously Shota Imanaga's greatest strength is his fastball. And so I do want to talk a lot about his fastball today. And I think the first thing that I want to dive into is actually how he thinks about throwing his fastball. And then we can dive into why it's so good later. But yeah, when he first got signed, I dug into some Japanese video where he explains how he throws his pitches, his thought process behind it, and stuff like that. And I thought that'd be pretty interesting to share. And so, yeah, Shota Imanaga, obviously he throws a fastball. It's a high carry pitch. And one point that I found really interesting was that he tries to throw it on a downward trajectory. And so he's holding the four seams. For those who are watching us, it'll be easy to track. But he holds a four seam and he tries to throw it down. He tries to throw it this way, down instead of straight. And I thought that was super interesting. And when I dug into his video, he pretty much just said he does this so that it feels like he's really pulling down on the seams, and he feels like it increases spin rate when he does this. So when I was actually playing, a couple months ago, when I threw my fastball, this is actually how I threw my fastball. And I had never been a high carry guy, but honestly, this cue really works. It increased my carry, and you can really feel it come off your fingers. Like it feels like you're really pulling down on the ball, which is what you need for a four seam and for it to carry. And so, the first thing that he thinks about is pulling down and throwing the ball down instead of straight. And I thought that was a great cue for anyone out there. All right.
Perfect. I like that. That's helpful because, four seam fastballs, obviously we want true spin on them. We want to get as much backspin as we can. We want it to be as clean a spin as possible. So it's kind of an interesting way to think of it because sometimes people just think more external, that's external too, but think more rip through the seams or do something more at the hand. But I kind of like that, just thinking about ripping straight down to create that backspin. That's cool. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Well, go ahead. You have something to add with that?
Yeah. I'm just gonna run through some of his cues for his fastball. And so another one that I found quite interesting was that he tinkers with the width of his fingers. So he has his four seam, and then he either goes wider or narrower. And he said that when he goes wider, he feels like he can command the ball way better. And so when he needs a strike, he's gonna get his fingers wide. And I don't know if there's any science or if it's just a feel thing, but he says that he can command this type of fastball much better than when he goes narrower. And when he goes narrower, it's more of a swing and miss pitch because he says that it feels like he gets way more carry on it. And when he goes narrow, it feels like he can get more spin rate and really pull down on the ball. And so I thought that was super interesting. I never really experimented with it. I just kind of kept it the same width. But I think if it's something that works for you, then it's definitely something that you could try. And it was interesting that he does that. I'm interested to see if he actually does that though in games, even in the MLB. I know he does that in Japan, but things change. So.
Yeah, no, that actually is really interesting, especially because he says he thinks he gets more swing and miss with the fingers together, more command, better feel for it with them spread. It would be fun for someone to have that be their job. They just literally track every time he throws a fastball, the fingers together, every time they're apart, just to see if it's more of a feeling or if it's actually true. And how does he decide when he's doing that? Is it pre-two strikes, before two strikes, it's always fingers apart, and then two-strike fastballs, it's always fingers together? Or how does he determine which one he's going to use? Did he talk about that at all, about how he decides which one it's going to be?
He just said count-based. So if he needs a strike, he's going wider. And then if it's a swing and miss pitch, then he's going narrower. And that's kind of what he said. But another one that I've thought was really interesting, and this is something that I felt all throughout my career, was that he only puts effort into the throw at release. And so his whole delivery is super loose, and then he only puts in effort right when he's about to let go. And it's interesting how he describes it. He says, it feels like gravity is taking his arm for a brief moment. And is describing the feeling of his external rotation when he's here, when his arm is up, and when his hand drops into external rotation. It feels like it's pure gravity doing that. It's just there's no tension in the arm. He just lets it drop, and then at release, he's putting all of his effort into the throw. And that's something that actually really helped me in my career as well. Was that if I wanted a little bit more velo, then that's something that I'd focus on is, all right, I'm going to try to be as relaxed as possible. And then at release, I'm putting everything into the ball. And so, I think that's a great cue as well.
Yeah, I like that one a lot too, because especially for younger players, oftentimes when they try to throw hard or they try to, blow a pitch by a guy with two strikes, they usually tense up, they try to move faster. And what ends up happening is they usually end up throwing slower, or they just don't command the ball the way they normally would. So sometimes that's why you see guys, even in like 3-0 counts, younger players, when they throw a fastball, it actually ends up being faster in a 3-0 count than it does in an 0-2 count, because they're just loose. They're trying just to throw it right through the target. And because there's less effort, but they're more efficient with their delivery, more smooth, they end up throwing it harder. And another cue that is interesting with that kind of goes along those lines that I know Tread, Ben Brewster specifically, has talked about, is thinking about music in a sense when you're throwing, with the idea being early in the delivery, you're moving down the mound like Beethoven music, super soft, super smooth. And then once that front foot lands, it's like Metallica. It's aggressive, everything you have right through the target. And I think that's just another way to put exactly what Imanaga is feeling, what he's trying to replicate. And I think that's a really, really good, helpful thing for a lot of guys to be just a little bit more smooth and efficient with their delivery, and to wait till the right time to allow everything to unleash on the baseball.
Yeah, 100%. And back when I was coaching some kids, we would do pull downs, and they'll go and do their pull down. And when I gave them this cue of, hey, I want you to be as relaxed as possible and only put in effort when you're about to release the ball, it was like an instant 3 to 5 mile an hour gain. So I mean, tensing up during the throw can really kill velo, and doing this can be like an unlock for some guys. So I think if you're watching this and you're a player, then it's definitely something to try.
No doubt. You got anything else on the fastball?
That's it for the cues.
Perfect. You want me to jump in with my guy to get started, or do you want to keep going?
Yep. Go ahead.
Perfect. So the guy that I am going to do is right-handed pitcher for the Red Sox, Tanner Houck. And I've written about him a couple of times just because what he's doing this year has just been really cool, because he had not a really rough season last year, but it wasn't his best season. It was probably the worst season of his career. Battled some injuries, finished with like a 5 ERA in 106 innings. Just wasn't completely sharp. And so far this year, he's been absolutely dominant. Like, you can make the argument that he's been the best pitcher in baseball this year overall. He has the highest WAR according to Fangraphs. That I want to say it's like 3.4 right now. He's got a 2.1 ERA. FIP is right around there as well. He's not walking anybody, and he's just mowing through guys. And he's pitching in one of the toughest divisions too in baseball, in the AL East. So what I'm going to start with today is simply just how he has changed his pitch usage. And that is something that I talk about often with guys, is you might have the right arsenal. You might be throwing enough strikes, but if you're not using your pitches in optimal situations, sometimes you're not going to perform as good as you could. And he has really dialed in his pitch usages, specifically against lefties, because he's a right-handed pitcher. He's more of an east-west profile. So what that means is he throws a sinker as his primary fastball. He has a sweepy slider. Most of his pitches are moving right to left. And that's really, really good when he's facing right-handed batters, but it's not so good, or it can be more of a challenge when he's facing a lefty, just because of the way the ball is approaching the strike zone. From his arm angle, from his movement profile, lefties typically like to face those guys more than same-sided hitters like a right-hander would. So I'm going to just break down his pitch usage and how he has changed everything. So actually, it might be helpful. I'm just going to share my screen. So if you guys are on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. If you're not, you'll want to head over there, because Josh is showing visuals too with grips. I'm going to be showing some grips here in a little bit. So you want to head over to that to watch this. Okay. Can you see my page? Yeah. Perfect. Just go to this one. Okay. So I'm going to hone in here on this bottom box area. So there's a lot going on here. Just just look at this bottom screen here. So you'll see on the left column, we have the seasons. So we have 2023, 2024. When we look at the percentages, that's just telling us how often he is throwing those pitches. When we look at 2023, he threw a four-seam fastball 9.9% of the time. This year, he's not throwing a four-seam at all. He's completely dropped it. Sinkers, he was throwing 30% of the time last year. He's still throwing them 30% of the time this year. Cutters, he threw a cutter last year at 11% of the time. This year, hardly at all at 2.6. The slider, which is a sweeper, he's throwing about the same, a little bit more this year, 38% last year, 42% this year. So he has upped it a little bit. And the pitch that has really changed from a usage standpoint is his splitter. So last year, he threw it 11% of the time, not very much. This year, he's throwing it 25% of the time. So that is the biggest change, is he scrapped the four-seam fastball. He's throwing less cutters, and he's throwing a lot more splitters. So I'm going to break this down now just by this season, just so you can see like exactly how he's using his stuff this year and how it differs when he's facing a righty compared to a lefty. Okay, so lefties, he's only throwing a fastball or his sinker 20% of the time. And this is a guy that can run it up to 95, 96, and he's hardly ever throwing his sinker against left-handed batters. Throwing it 20% of the time, throws his cutter 4.5% of the time. So kind of just like a show me pitch to show a harder pitch running in on the hands. Then he throws his sweeper 38% of the time and his splitter 37% of the time. So those two pitches are carrying the bulk of the load from an arsenal standpoint. He's throwing that sweeper down and in, he's throwing that split down and away, and then every once in a while throws a sinker in there. And the reason for that is sinkers just don't perform as well against lefties. It's actually the worst performing pitch against lefties as a right-handed pitcher is the sinker. And that's why he's essentially just eliminated it. Only 1 out of every 5 pitches is that pitch. The rest of it, they're moving to the glove side, whether it's a cutter or a slider, or he's throwing that split. Now with righties, it switches a little bit. Righties, sinkers are very advantageous. So he's throwing a lot of those. He's throwing 43% sinkers, hardly any cutters, and then a lot of sliders at 45%, and then the occasional split at 12%. So primarily he's running sinkers in on the hands, sweepers away off of it, and then to keep them honest, he's throwing just enough of that splitter to make them have to respect it so that they can't just sit on one of the other pitches. And changing his arsenal like this or changing his usage has just completely changed the way he's gotten lefties out this year. For a while, actually, this year, he was getting lefties out at the same rate as righties, which is just unheard of, honestly, as an East-West type of pitcher. And it really comes down to just the ability to reduce the usage of a pitch and increase another pitch. And now he's using those more optimally. And I'll talk about here in a little bit how he's changed the movement of some of these pitches, but they haven't changed enough to where that alone would have made him a better pitcher. But the fact that he's just optimizing his usage is really taking his game to another level. And he's now, leading the Red Sox pitching staff and has been one of the best pitchers in baseball so far this year.
Yeah, I love Tanner Houck because when I was playing, I actually that was my comp. Like a lot of people were like, hey, like this might be someone that you compare yourself to, because I had a big close off stride. I was crossbody and lower arm slot. And I know he gets compared to Chris Sale a lot, just the righty version of him. And so that's kind of how I threw as well. So I really loved how he threw. Something that was really interesting to me when I was looking into him, this was a little bit back, was his sweeper and why and how it was so good, because it didn't have too much movement. When I was looking at it, it was like -10, like nothing super special, but it was still performing really well. Has that improved this year, Jared?
Yeah, the sweeper is actually a lot better now. I'll get into that because I'm going to go over his grips because he did change a grip with his sweeper. But yeah, it was 10, 11, something like that last year. It's closer to, I want to say 17 inches of sweep now this year. And it's gotten even better from a performance standpoint. But the reason it still performed okay at that 10, 11 mark is because his sinker has so much horizontal break to it. The pitch is moving relative to that. So if a batter's used to the sinker as his primary fastball and it has, let's just say 16 inches of horizontal, and then his sweeper had 10, that's still 26 inches of difference off of the fastball. And if he's locating it well, it's still going to get good results. Now that he's improved the sweeper even more, now it's getting even better results.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see hear you dive into him, because, I just kept up with him the whole time when he was in the bullpen, when he came out and started. He had the big wind-up, the over-the-head delivery, but then he went to the set position. And I actually don't know what he's doing right now. He might have stuck with the set position because he was having success. I'm not sure. But, I really like Tanner Houck, and I'm excited for you to dive in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, let's just keep going back and forth. We'll keep going over some points that we have for each guy. So what do you got next on Imanaga?
All right. So as we talked about, his fastball is his biggest strength. And so I wanted to dive into a little bit of the numbers and why it is so good. I know, Jared, you made a post about this when he first got signed, and there's been a lot of hype around his fastball. And I just wanted to quickly go over why it's so good, despite, having despite it not being like 98 to 100, and why he's getting so many swing and misses. And so I think it starts with his height. So Imanaga is 5'10", which is much shorter than MLB average. And this allows him to have a lower release point. And so when he's throwing, his release point is really low. And so it maximizes his vertical approach angle. And vertical approach angle, Jared might be able to explain it a little bit better than me, but it's the angle at which the pitch is coming at home plate. And so you want it as flat as possible for a ride carry type guy. So basically that means like you want to try to make it look like it's dropping as little as possible. And so if you have a lower release point, then it's coming from a lower angle, and so it's going to look a little bit flatter than if it was coming from a higher arm slot. And so that's kind of where he's really elite at, because it's a perfect mix of his super short, and then he has a lower release point. It's at 5.49, and he gets a lot of ride to it. And I'm not sure of the exact metrics of his fastball because I don't have True Media, but I'm pretty sure it's like 18 plus, right? Something like that.
Yeah, it's I actually have it up right now. It's 18 and a half.
Okay. Yeah, 18 and a half. So that's pretty elite. That's pretty elite carry. And so combining that with the lower release point, it's just it's just a great pitch up in the zone. And so another thing that I want to talk about was that his command is just crazy. There's this new stat called what is it? W execution plus. Yeah. And it's just the metric that measures how well is it how well you place the pitch where it plays the best. Is that right?
I'm actually not fully sure. Is it on Fangraphs or what's it on?
It's like W stuff plus and W execution plus.
Well, what website are you on?
It's just the tread.
On tread stuff. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure. I haven't looked into that enough to be honest with you, but yeah, I'm guessing. Yeah, it's either that. It's either like how often they're throwing it in the optimal location, or it's how close to within the target of the catcher set up is it thrown. I'm not sure if they can measure that stuff exactly, but essentially, yeah, how well are you executing pitches is the simplest way to look at it. It's just a matter of how they're quantifying execution.
Yeah. And so with the ranges, we had a very similar thing. I don't know if it was actually called W execution plus, but we had a location metric. And basically what they measured was, all right, where does this pitch play the best? And how often do you throw it there? And so I'm pretty sure this is pretty similar. But anyway, he just executes his fastball really, really well. And if you look at his heat map, basically it's all red at the top of the zone and a little bit in the middle. And everyone's like, well, like, how can you have so much success, like throwing it in the middle a lot of the time? Because if you do look at his heat map, it is pretty red down the middle, like right down the middle. But during the start of the season, he wasn't getting hit. He was having a great stretch. So basically it comes down to, the low release point, the high carry, and as long as he's like middle up in the zone, then he's going to be able to get some swing and misses. Despite it being 92, 93, 94, he doesn't throw gas, but just that mix of low release point plus high carry is what gets him the success on his fastball and the swing and misses.
Yeah, that's good. And I actually just looked at it a little bit. So like if you break it down by count, he actually locates the fastball pretty well. So if you look at it just with two strikes, I guess against righties, it's like shaving the top of the zone perfectly. So when he's looking for a swing and a miss, he's executing at the top of the zone perfectly. Against lefties, it's more just away. Like most of them are up, but some of them are like middle height wise, but they're all away for the most part. So my guess is maybe before 2 strikes, he just doesn't get fine. He just says, here it is, try and hit it. I'm going to come at you. You're either going to put it in play and hopefully I'm going to get an out, or I'm going to get ahead with strike 1. So like, and I think that's a great mindset. I'm kind of reading into it. If that is his approach, it just looks like it because it's more of a general middle location before 2 strikes, and after 2 strikes, he gets more fine. I think that's an approach that a lot of players should take. Like, don't try to get cute 0-0 or 1-0, 1-1. Like, just attack the zone, challenge them to hit it early in the count. And then when you get to 2 strikes, then you can try to go to specific locations. Yeah,
that's a great mindset. I know we talked a little bit about the stats on the first pitch, and it's something crazy. Like, if they hit it, then it's I can't remember the exact stat. Oh, do you remember it? I don't want to butcher it.
No, I can't remember it. It's just it favors the pitcher. Attack the zone.
Yeah. If they hit it, then they're pretty much out. That was pretty much the summary of the talk. So yeah, that's a good mentality. All right, first pitch or like early in the count in general, just attack the zone, the general area, and then when you get ahead, all right, now you can really start to put it where it really plays. And so, yeah, I thought that was a pretty interesting find.
No, that's great. You have anything else on that? Or are you ready for my next one?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
All right. Well, we alluded to it just a second ago, but now we're going to talk about Houck's pitch movement and how he has improved some of his pitch shapes. So I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Can you see these pitch plots?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the one on the left is 2023. The one on the right is 2024. The blue is a 4-seam fastball. I'm not sure why there's 2 dots. So for those of you that aren't super familiar with movement plots, the bigger circles that are dark with a certain color, that is the average movement for that pitch type. So blue is fastballs, the yellow is sinkers, the orange is cutters, the green is sliders, and then the splitter is teal. So you can see here his fastballs are there. There's 2. I'm not sure why. Don't worry about that. Cutter, sinker, slider, split. The main differences, the sinker is basically the same. Actually, if anything, the sinker has less movement than it did last year, but it's still really good. The splitter has more depth. The cutter has more depth and is like a true bullet now this year. And the sweeper clearly has way more movement, way more horizontal movement. So I'm just going to go pitch by pitch here so we can pull up the averages. And as it loads, we can see here 2023 top column, 2024 bottom column. The induced vertical break on the sinker last year was -1. This year it's 0.4. So not much of a difference, but 1.4 inches is still something worth noting. This year, though, he has 1 more extra inch of horizontal break than last year at 16.4, had 15.4 last year. As far as I know, sinker did not change from a grip standpoint or anything like that. It just slightly changed. He did change his release height, and I'm going to talk about that in my last point after you go again. But we'll touch on that here in a little bit. So sinker, relatively the same, didn't make an active change with that pitch. Now for the cutter. So cutter last year was 91, so it averaged 91. This year it's only averaging 87. But the movement is way different. Last year, it had 7.2 inches of induced vertical break with 3.4 inches of arm side horizontal movement. This year, it's about as pure bullet as it gets, 0.8 induced vertical break, -0.5 horizontal. So it's basically right in the middle. It's more of a true gyro slider. It's labeled a cutter, but it's really a gyro slider. And at 87, that pitch is going to play really well. I don't have a grip change for this one, but there's obviously something changed. Like you don't lose 7 inches of vertical break and add 3 inches of horizontal without making some sort of change. I'm just not aware of that one. But the one that I am aware of is his sweeper and his splitter. So we'll go with the sweeper to start. First, let's look at the movement difference. Last year, -2.4 induced vertical break. This year, -1.3. Virtually the same. That one's not as big of a deal. It's the horizontal break I want to focus on. Horizontal break went from -11 last year to -17. So he got an extra 6 inches of horizontal break this year compared to last year. And I'm going to go back to showing myself so that I can show you the grip change that he made. Very subtle, very subtle. I know last year, actually, he played with a couple grips, but the one he's throwing now is very similar to what he finished the year with last year. So last year, he was throwing his slider like this. Pretty typical slider grip or sweeper grip. The difference was let me change the ball this way. He was a little bit further back on the seams like this. So he wasn't like over this part of the ball very much. He was like, it was almost like, a cutter for some guys, honestly. So he wasn't really way over on the leather going into the horseshoe. He was more just back here, fingers together. This year, super simple change. All he did is now he's further up on the seam. He's up right here, just like this, which I'm guessing allows him to pull through the inside of this seam a little bit better to get a little bit more side spin, a little bit higher spin efficiency, which is allowing this pitch to take off an extra 6 inches. He did play around a little bit with this grip, which is another common sweeper grip. I don't know what the movement was on it. I just saw a video of him talking about it early in the season last year that he was throwing something similar to this. And then at some point he switched to this grip here. And now this year, he's just a little bit further up on the inside of that horseshoe. Really simple change, which is great, right? As a pitcher, when Josh, like if it's a really minor change that I have to make, it makes it so much easier to adjust from an execution standpoint because it's not really a different feel. I just climbed up maybe 3 inches on the baseball, and now I just do what I did before. I'm just in a better position to leverage those seams a little bit more. So that is the sweeper. The last pitch, and this one's a big one that he changed, is the splitter. So I need to share my screen one more time. Now with the splitter, as it loads, last year, he averaged 1.3 inches of induced vertical break, 14 inches of horizontal. This year, he's getting -3 inches of induced vertical break and 13.7 horizontal. Horizontal basically the same, but he's gained 4 inches of depth on this pitch. And this one was another grip change that wasn't that much different from before, but enough to make a difference. So last year, he was throwing similar to a Kevin Gausman splitter grip. So he had these 3 fingers, so his middle finger, ring finger, and pinky on one side of the ball and on one side of the seam here, like this 2 seam. And then the ring finger was just forming a circle like this. So he was holding it like this. These 3 fingers were all the way up together like so. All he did this year is he slid those fingers over a little bit more. And it's more of, honestly, this is a changeup now. I wouldn't even call this a splitter. He has his ring finger on the outside of this seam here, his middle finger on the inside of that seam, and his pinky's all the way up against that ring finger. And then he just does a circle change just like that. So it's really a 2-seam changeup. He just has that pinky up all the way up, which is a little bit more unique. And he's at a slight angle so he can hook those seams a little bit. And now it's just allowed him to kick the axis a little bit more sideways, and the seams are just oriented a little bit better for him to get a little bit more drop. So once again, subtle change that probably didn't take him as long as a complete overhaul with a pitch to increase the movement and still keep the feel of the pitch. So I thought it was pretty cool. Like, we talk about younger players all the time having to make adjustments. They need to, learn as they get older. They need to mature. They need to do X, Y, and Z. But when you see a big leaguer who has had success at the big league level and then maybe goes through a rough patch for a season, to see those types of guys make changes is really cool. Because it's like, if a big leaguer thinks he needs to make changes, needs to make adjustments, and is willing to make these grip changes, there's no reason a high school or college kid shouldn't be doing whatever it takes to take his game to the next level, whether it is pitch movement or velocity, whatever it might be. I just think it's pretty incredible, the data that we have access to now and the interviews and everything involved with big leaguers, that we can learn so much and really get inside their process and what they're doing and what they are trying to change, and actively see how the results are showing up as a result. So that's what I got on how, main changes were the sweeper and the splitter. Did make change through the cutter movement. I just unfortunately don't know what that change was, but I'm definitely going to be on the hunt for that one.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Did those changes happen at the start of the 2024 season, or did he make a couple adjustments throughout the season?
I don't know exactly when the change happened, but I'm pretty sure it's been the entire season he's had these grips, because I found it from like an earlier, like spring training, I want to say, is where I found these. So yeah, it's been this whole season, and it's been a night and day difference from a performance standpoint.
Awesome. And how about that gyro slider / cutter? Is he using that as a swing and miss right now, or is it more of just like a get back in the count type pitch?
Yeah, I mean, he hardly ever throws it. It's like 4% of the time. So I think it's just more of just a show me pitch for lefties because it's only to lefties. He doesn't throw it to righties. I think it's just something to keep him honest because he abuses sliders down and in, splitters away. And I think maybe if it's like a longer at bat or like you said, he's behind, it's 2-0, he can just throw something different from his fastball to get back in the count.
Yeah, that's super interesting because when I was watching him couple years ago, maybe even just a year ago, like his splitter wasn't really like a go-to pitch for him. I know it was very, very new, and he would only use it against lefties like sometimes. And so it's actually super interesting to see him like using that so much more this year.
Yeah, and it's not really a swing and miss pitch even this year for him. Like it actually I think is like below league average from a miss percentage standpoint, but the contact is super weak and he's getting a ton of ground balls. I think it's getting like 65% ground balls, which is super high. I don't know what average is for splitters, but I just know in general, average ground ball rate in baseball is around 45%. So he's getting 65% ground balls with it. And when the ball is put in play, generally speaking, it is pretty weak contact. So it's not his swing and miss pitch. The sweeper is more of that, but it's getting really good results nonetheless.
And what's his biggest in zone pitch? Is it the sinker?
I'm gonna guess it is, but why don't we take a look real quick? We got it here.
I asked that because when I was looking at him, it felt like his sinker was just like it would move too much for him to control. And so maybe he made an adjustment, and I guess like the less drop might have helped. But I thought that's why he always threw the four seam, was because the sinker was just so tough to control.
Well, he's not walking anybody this year, so I think. Let me go to 2024. Yeah, like so his walk rate is 4.3% this year. So he's literally not walking anybody. Big league average is 8.5%. He's walking half the guys that the major league average pitcher walks. Let's look at in zone. Sinker, 53%. So that actually is a little bit lower. But his strike percentage is super high. So in zone percentage is strictly just is the pitch in the strike zone, regardless of whether it's called a ball or a strike. Average is about 56% for sinkers. He's at 53, but his strike percentage is 70%. Average is around 64%. Ooh. So it's super high. So that means he's getting swings outside of the strike zone, which is really, really good. So getting great results, not a miss pitch, like 14%. That's about average for a sinker, but like sinkers aren't designed to be miss pitches or to get ground balls. And he gets 55% ground balls, which is pretty good. And then coming back to the splitter 68%, actually 68.5% ground ball rate. And a 259 expected WOBA, which is just absolutely phenomenal. And then you can see, like I said, not a lot of miss, 23%. Average is actually 30%. So he's below average on the miss percentage for changeups, but it's getting super weak contact, which is just as valuable.
Do you know if he is a big stuff plus guy? Like all of his pitches grade out really well?
That's a good question. I'll have to look that up another time, but I'm going to guess his sweeper definitely grades out well. That's going to be his highest graded pitch without a doubt, if I were to guess. His splitter might be, but the issue is pitches are graded in relationship to your primary fastball, which for him is a sinker, and the movement separation isn't that much, just because most guys that are sinker changeup guys, like it's really hard to get a big movement gap in those pitches, especially when your sinker's already down to 0 inches of vertical break. But I would guess that his sweeper grades out well, and his cutter actually probably grades out pretty well too.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I thought just listening to his pitch characteristics, I feel like they're not going to be too crazy, and that's a good example of someone who's, well, I might be wrong, but someone who doesn't have like elite pitches, but are just dominating right now.
Maybe while you start talking about your next point for Imanaga, I'll look it up on Fangraphs real quick and see what his stuff plus is.
All right, sweet. Well, I'm going to jump into my last point on Imanaga. So he throws his four seam at about 58%. I don't know if that's gone down or up by now. But the second most used pitch is his splitter at the time of this when it was shown. It was at 32% usage rate. And so he's been using his splitter a ton. Obviously, his four seam is his go-to, but his splitter is his next go-to. And so I wanted to show exactly how he throws it, a couple of his grips. Something that's super interesting is that he has a splitter, but also he has a traditional changeup. And I'm going to call it traditional because it's a traditional changeup in Japan, but it's a really weird grip that I never see in the US. And it's basically, it's like a splitter, but it's with your index and ring finger. And your middle finger is just like kind of floating. And so, when I played in Japan, I played when I was really young. And this is the changeup that you're taught in Japan. There's no circle change, there's no pronate, there's no like seam shift changeups, none of that. It's basically you throw this changeup where it's basically a splitter with your index and ring finger until you can throw a splitter, until you're big enough for your fingers to spread enough to throw a splitter. But in Japan, he threw this a lot, and it was a really good pitch for him. I'm not too sure if he throws it a lot now. It's kind of tough to see the difference between the splitter and the changeup, especially with this grip. I feel like the metrics will be pretty much the same. But yeah, his split change is his pitch. And the interesting thing about his split was that he throws it with the four seam grip. So he goes four seam, fastball right here, and his splitter, he just splits it. And so he throws it off the four seams. And I'm not too sure if that's why it's so effective, and because like the rotation looks the same. I'm not sure if the hitters can actually pick that up or not. But that's how he throws it, and that's how he's getting all these that's his secondary weapon. And so I thought that was interesting how he had two grips for two different changeups / splitters. And that's pretty much his secondary go-to right now.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've heard of a couple guys doing that where they have two different grips depending on whether they want to swing and miss or they want to strike for the pitch, just whatever one they have more feel for. But I don't know. I always thought that was interesting. I can't say I ever did that. Did you ever play around with different grips depending on like the counter situation?
I always had a really hard time throwing changeups and splitters. Like later in my career when I discovered that you don't have to pronate on a changeup, and then my changeup got a whole lot better. But most of my career, I was like, damn, I just got to grip the two seam and pronate it, and I just don't like pronating. I'm a big supinator, so it never really worked for me. I did mess around with splitters, and I did work with a Japanese coach who he actually taught Senga his ghost fork. And so I was working with him. He was with the Rangers for a year. And something interesting about the splitter, he told me that there are 3 ways to throw a splitter. So the first way is to just split the two seams and throw it straight. You're just going to throw it straight right here. The second way is to hook a seam with your index finger and try to spin it off that index finger. So if I'm going right here, then I'll spin off the index finger right here. So it's more of like a, you want like arm side type movement. You're trying to spin it to go towards your arm side. And the last one, which I've never actually seen, is you're trying to hook it with your middle finger, and then you're trying to gyro it as you throw the splitter. And I thought that was super interesting because in the US, like we never see gyro splitters, but in Japan, like Sasaki, he throws a gyro splitter, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot of him in the coming years, but his splitter is absolutely nasty. And so I think that's a pitch that it might make its way to the US. But yeah, those are 3 ways to throw a splitter.
The one where you hook the seam, is that more for like a pronator? Because it seems like you would pronate that one to create that spin. Is that right or no? Or is it more just like trying to kick it with your finger?
I think yeah, it's more for the pronators. You're hooking it there, and then I feel like you can just throw it straight and try to get it to come off your index finger.
Yeah.
But I think it'd definitely be better for the pronators because they can just get right around it, like here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Perfect. You got anything else on the split for him?
No, I think that's it.
Cool. Well, I'll dive into my last point for Mr. Houck. And I alluded to this a second ago, but he has made some mechanical changes. His release height is different and his delivery is different. So we'll start with looking at the release height difference. And it's actually a pretty substantial change. So 2023 here, this top column, 2024, where it says RELZ, that's release Z, that is release height. And it's in inches. So in 2023, he averaged 63.6 inches, 5 feet, 3 inches essentially, or 5 feet, 4 inches, right around there. This year, he is averaging 5 foot 7 inches. So 4 inch difference, close to it, in release height. From release X, so this is how far away from the center of the rubber is he releasing the ball. It's a negative number because that is from the middle of the rubber moving in the direction of third base. It would be a positive number if it was towards first base. So for him, last year, he was at 35 inches away from the center of the rubber towards third base at release. This year, he's only at 28 inches. So a 7-inch difference in that release side and a 4-inch difference in release height. So I'll pull up some videos so you can kind of get an idea on this. Okay, so this one on the left is from last year. Just watch his delivery. I'll just play this full speed to start. Sorry if there's sound. I'm not sure how to mute this. But you can see pretty much, like you said, crossbody goes over the head, pretty smooth delivery.
I'm not seeing the video.
Oh, you can't see it?
No.
It's
still the
still on the.
statistics.
Okay, let me try to change that then. All right, do over. I'm glad you stopped me. Share screen. Entire screen. We'll just do that. How about now?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so one on the left is last season. I'll play this full speed, and you'll just be able to see how he goes over the head, throws crossbody. Okay, now this season. So similar, but he doesn't go over his head anymore. So no more over the head. We can see stays right about there. Go up a little bit more. So he brings it up to his head as he goes into leg lift. This one on the left goes up overhead before going into his delivery. Pretty far across body. Probably about the same, I'd say. Maybe a little bit more last year, but about the same. Yeah, I would say maybe a hair more. But release height is definitely different. So it's a 4-inch difference from last year to this year. And the reason why his release side is different is, number one, the release height is higher. So when the release height's higher, your side release is going to be a little bit different. But he also made a subtle change where he stands on the rubber. So last year, as you can see, as he goes into this, if you look at his back foot here, towards the first base side of the rubber, but most of his foot is still on the rubber. When we look at this year, he is shading over towards first base much more. So not much of a difference, but I would say probably a 4-inch difference, 4-inch difference on where he's staying on the rubber. He's more towards first base now than last year. And what's cool about this, or what's good about this, is it helps him against left-handed batters. So we talked about the pitch movement, we talked about the usage. That's one way to optimize how you get lefties out. So let me take my screen off now. But the other thing to consider is horizontal approach angle actually plays a really big factor into how effective you are against righties versus lefties as well. And that's going to go into your pitch shapes, but also where you stand on the rubber and your release height is going to play into the horizontal approach angle. Against righties, it's advantageous to be on the third base side, to release on the third base side, because that pitch, especially when he throws a sweeper, is starting behind him and it's running away from him. Sinkers, it's going to start at an angle behind him going towards home plate and then running back towards the batter. Very uncomfortable at bat for a right on right guy, for a guy that has a lower slot throwing towards the third base side. But when he's facing a lefty and he does that, they can just see the ball traveling towards them for so long. That's why they're so effective against right-handed pitchers, lefty batters, is just because they're able to see the ball so much longer. So a way to combat that is to stand further on the first base side when you're facing lefties. Now, he's not changing from batter to batter. Some guys do that. He's not. But what I would suggest for guys like him is to do exactly what he's doing. Try to favor that first base side of the rubber all the time, just because you're still going to be super effective against same-sided hitters because he still has a lower slot. He's still going cross-body. Like, it's still going to be an uncomfortable at bat. But now he's neutralizing his effectiveness against lefties a little bit more, so it's not as severe of a platoon split against lefties compared to righties. So that's just another subtle change, right? Like, a lot of these changes that he's made are really in his control. Like, he can decide where he stands on the rubber. Obviously he made some sort of mechanical change to change his release height. Pitch usage is completely in your control. Like, that one is just simply throw this pitch or don't throw this pitch. The one thing where he had to make really active changes, along with mechanics, of course, is the pitch movement. He did have to make some sort of change with that, but those were very subtle changes. And you make all these subtle changes and you add them all up, and you're looking at, one of the front runners for the Cy Young Award this year, just by making all these little adjustments that have now made him super, super effective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Why do you think he went a little bit more towards first base side, especially because his cross body, right? I feel like if he would wanted to increase command and that was his focus, then maybe he would like stay towards a little bit of the middle of the rubber and straighten out his stride a little bit or something like that. I feel like it was because that's what I did when I was struggling with command and I was on the very far left side of the rubber. I was on the first base side of the rubber, and pretty much only my toes were on the rubber. And I would throw, and I was super crossbody. What I got told was, hey, like, let's try to get you a little bit across on the plate and try to get you a little bit more straighter to the plate. Do you have any guesses as to why he made that adjustment?
Well, let me verify first. So you moved to the middle of the rubber, or you moved to the third base side of the rubber?
I kept creeping towards the third base side just so that I would straighten out.
Okay, so the goal was, okay, if I keep sliding over towards third base, you're going to stop throwing severely cross-body because your direction will be going towards the dugout, essentially. So, like, it subconsciously will help you straighten out your stride?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see the logic behind it. For sure. I think in Tanner's situation, his wasn't necessarily a command issue because even though he has reduced his walks this year, he didn't walk a lot of guys last year. Like, he was league average. He had an 8.5% walk rate. So, like, he didn't have an issue throwing strikes. It was more so just his effectiveness against lefties. Lefties just teed off on him. He gave up a lot of damage, hard contact. So he needed to find a way to get weaker contact and miss more bats. And he's done that. He's been able to induce much weaker contact. So I think that's, at least from my mind, it makes sense why he moved more towards the first base side, because coming back to the horizontal approach angles, he's now able to start those pitches more over the plate or more towards the batter rather than it being coming from the third base angle. It still is, of course, because of how far across body he is and how low his slot is, but it's at least a little bit better. And every little inch matters, right? And he made, what did I say, like a 7-inch difference. So that's actually quite a bit. 7-inch difference in his release side. And that's just allowing him to be more effective, along with optimizing pitch usage and the locations and movement of his pitches.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you said that his release height got a lot higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting one that I'm not really I'm trying to get my head around, because I feel like his stuff would have like gotten a little bit worse if he did that, because sinker movement went down. I guess like the angle got a little bit better, but what do you got on that?
So that's what I was going to say, right? So like movement is important to look at it by itself. There's something you can get from it, but knowing the relationship between the release height is super important as well. So yeah, even though the sinker is moving, was like, I think I said like 1.4 inches less than last year, it's actually relatively moving more because his release height is 4 inches higher. So coming back to what you were talking about with Imanaga with vertical approach angle, it's the exact opposite with sinkers compared to four-seam fastballs. Four-seamers, you want to be flat, and if I throw it higher in the zone, it's going to be flatter. If I have a low release height with good carry, it's going to be even flatter, and it has that ride carry effect to where it just looks like the ball is just rising on the batter. With sinkers, it's the opposite. If you have higher slots with low vertical breaks, so more sink, and you're throwing at the bottom of the zone, that pitch is going to be super steep coming downwards towards the bottom of the zone. So him raising his arm slot by 4 inches already makes it a steeper angle if the pitch stays the same from a movement standpoint. Now he lost 1.4 inches, but that trade-off of 4 inches in release height is still worth it, and he's still able to get even more of a steeper approach with that pitch. And that's another thing, like the splitter. He improved the splitter, change up, whatever you want to call it, by 4 inches. He has 4 more inches of depth now, and he has a 4-inch lower or higher release height, which is just really incredible. So now that splitter is even more effective than last year, regardless of the vertical break dropping. But now you add 4 more inches of drop from 4 inches higher of a release height, and that's why it's getting really, really good results from a ground ball standpoint.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I think the TrackMan needs to, maybe the TrackMan numbers don't show everything sometimes, and that's something that I learned a little bit later in my career. But yeah, that's super duper interesting.
Yeah, no, that was great, dude. I enjoyed this. I think this is something we might have to do moving forward and dive into some guys. I think this was really helpful. I learned some stuff about Imanaga and obviously Houck, as I did some research on this that hopefully can help some players. I think we gave some pretty good, helpful insights on both these guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. See you guys next week.